He said it like he was asking for another beer. You're worthless. Always were. And just like that, the table fell quiet. Someone chuckled. One of his cousins, I think. They always laughed when he got cruel. Like it was part of the performance. The grill hissed behind me. Kids darted past with juice boxes. Plastic plates rattled in the breeze. Just a backyard BBQ. But something about that moment. It blistered. I was holding a fork so flimsy, I thought it might snap in my hand. And honestly, so might I. I hadn't seen most of them in years, not since the divorce. Not since I vanished from their group texts and holiday cards. And now, back in their yard, they looked at me like I'd just wandered out of a lost file. And Tom. He made damn sure I knew my place. He leaned back in his lawn chair like a king, beer balanced on his thigh, kids giggling at his side. You tried that whole career thing, he smirked. Didn't work out, huh? Nobody spoke. Not my sister. Not his girlfriend. Not even Tyler. That part stung the most. I didn't yell. Didn't break down. Didn't toss my plate. I just stared at the burger on it. It looked dry. Left out too long in the sun. So had I. They didn't know what I'd given up, what I'd endured. What I still carry. Because I never told them. All those years I was gone. They thought I worked in logistics. I let them. It was easier than explaining why I came back with no photos, no plaques, just silence and pills I didn't want. Tom knew more than the rest. He'd seen the worst of me, and he turned it into a story he could sell: burnout, drama, failure. But something shifted that day. I was getting ready to leave. A plate in the trash, keys in hand, when a black SUV eased to the curb. Two men stepped out. Sharp suits. Eyes scanning. One of them locked onto me and crossed the lawn like he knew every step. He didn't say hello. Didn't ask if this was a bad time. He just stopped, looked straight at me, and said, "Agent Honor. Ma'am, we need you." I didn't go back to the BBQ. Didn't wave goodbye. Didn't look at Tom. Didn't check to see if my son was watching. I just got in the SUV and shut the door behind me. It wasn't protocol, no code phrases, no folders marked confidential, just a quiet man in a suit who handed me a phone and said, "Listen first." A voice came through, distorted slightly, familiar in a way that made my spine tense. I only remember the last line. "Mom may need you again. Soon." Then the call cut. No explanation. No orders. Just the weight of the past knocking once, before it vanished again. They dropped me off 3 blocks from my apartment. No trace they'd ever been there. By the time I got inside, my hands were shaking. The place smelled like dust and takeout. I didn't bother turning on the lights. Some nights, I'd sit in the dark just to feel still. Like if nothing moved, nothing could find me. I dropped my keys in the bowl, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of the living room, waiting for the panic to settle. It didn't. I filled a glass with water. The faucet sputtered like it always did. This apartment isn't much. Couch with one cushion flatter than the rest. A coffee table with a crack down the middle. A lamp that flickers when it rains. But it's mine, paid for with the last chunk of hazard pay I didn't burn through. And quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. I sat on the couch, curled up like I used to on recon flights. Tight, still, listening for something I couldn't name. Tom's words still echoed. "Didn't work out, huh?" He used to say things like that when no one else could hear. Now he says them loud enough for the kids to repeat. To them, he's the one who stayed. I'm the one who walked away. And the version of me he tells, that's the one they remember. I never corrected him. Didn't want to drag the kids through my truths. Didn't want to explain why some nights I woke up choking on nothing. But after tonight, After hearing my old call sign again, I wasn't sure I could stay hidden much longer. I turned on the laptop. Old thing, takes its time. Just like me. I logged into the blog. Go. Just stories I always said. Fiction. Characters I invented. Only, I didn't invent them. I just renamed the memories. Scrubbed out the blood and left the bones. The post from last week had more traffic than usual. A story set in Sahel. About a female analyst who got left behind. Fought her way out alone. I wasn't supposed to write that one. But it came out fast, like something breaking through. 12 new comments, 3 messages, and 1 email. Subject: Gyok submission interested in speaking. I hovered, then clicked. Hi MH, your work stopped me cold. We're exploring powerful female voices for publication, and Gyoa struck a chord. Would you consider adapting it for print? Best, Ava G. Senior Editor, Darrow Books. I blinked at the screen. Darrow was real. I googled it twice. Big enough to matter. Small enough to take risks. They didn't know who I was. Not really. They just liked the pain in the sentences. That's the thing about trauma. It leaks. No matter how careful you are. I closed the laptop, but the words stayed with me. Would you consider adapting it for print? I stood. Paced. My hand brushed the bookshelf. Top corner. An envelope taped behind the frame. Still sealed. The one with the metal I never opened. I used to think not opening it was an act of defiance. Now I wasn't sure if it was just fear. I sat down again and clicked back into the post. The Sahel piece. I skimmed through it, line by line. Desert wind. Faulty intel. A voice in the headset that never came back. All true. Even the limp. My right knee still tight on cold mornings. I'd written it raw. Too raw, and someone knew. A new comment had popped up. A Anonymous 342 AMs. You wrote her too well. Too close. You were there, weren't you? My throat tightened. I stared at the screen. Listened to the fridge hum. Felt the old weight return. The one I thought I'd buried with the name Agent Honor. Whoever it was. They saw through the story. Past the edits. Into the wound. And for the first time in years, I wasn't alone with it. Which made it better. And worse. I read the comment 5 times. Each word slower than the last. You wrote her too well. Too close. You were there, weren't you? Whoever wrote it didn't sign their name. Didn't leave an email. No IP trace. Just a blank gray dot. They knew what they were doing. Same tricks we used back when we wanted to leave no footprint. I refreshed the page. The comment stayed. Mocking me. Or warning me. I couldn't tell which. I opened my analytics dashboard. It's basic. Free plugin, barely works. But tonight, it was lit up. Unusual activity. Spikes in traffic from places I hadn't seen before. Virginia. Brussels. A naval base in Guam. And the Sahel story. Downloaded 4 times. Once at 2:13 a.m., once at 2:14, once at 20:15, and again at 30:41, right before the comment dropped. I stared at the timestamps. My stomach knotted. This wasn't some curious reader. This was someone digging. Someone who wanted a record. I clicked open my drafts folder. Scrolled past the ones I never posted. Some of them. They weren't fiction at all. They were confession. Coded in metaphors and memory loss. I should have deleted them. But I couldn't. Even now, part of me wanted them to be found. Not by the public. Not by the press. But by someone who'd lived it too. Someone who remembered how we were taught to shut up. And fade out. I checked the front door again. Deadbolt still locked. Chain still clipped. Then I pulled the curtains shut. I hadn't done that in months, because for the first time since I left the agency, I felt seen. Not safe, but seen. And there's a big difference. I ran a reverse trace on the IP from Guam. Didn't expect to get anything. Half these proxies loop back through coffee shop routers or dead servers. But this one pinged a name I hadn't seen in years. Dannerfield, Naval Comms Training Division. The last time I saw that base, it was red dirt, empty bunks, and a sky so wide it made you feel hollow. I clicked deeper. It wasn't just random browsing. Someone had accessed 5 different posts and paused longest on one from 8 months ago. A story called Echo Point. Nobody ever commented on that one. It was buried in the archives. Short, blunt, just a field report disguised as fiction. A woman pinned under a collapsed radio tower. Left for dead. Rescued by a drone team that was never officially dispatched. I remember writing it on a night I couldn't sleep. Hands cold. Back aching. Pacing like I was still waiting for extraction. And the only person who knew I'd been there was Lieutenant Reyes. He was young. Too young to see what he saw. But sharp. Quiet. The kind who listened more than he spoke. He sat beside me in the evac chopper. Pressed a blanket against my ribs and said, "You'll be okay, Mom. They'll forget this." You shouldn't. I never saw him again after that. I didn't ask where they sent him. Didn't want to know. But the comment. The traffic spike. The quiet dig into Echo Point. It felt like him. It felt like someone opening a door I'd nailed shut. Not to hurt me. But to say, I remember. And I'm still watching. I leaned back, hand over my mouth. It shouldn't feel comforting. But it did. And that scared me more than anything. Because when you've lived this long with silence, recognition doesn't feel safe. It feels like warning. There was one draft I never opened, not since the day I wrote it. I'd labeled it, Hold. No title. No tags. Just a raw memory I couldn't let out, but couldn't quite delete. I clicked it open. The screen blinked like it didn't want to remember either. But there it was. The mud. The smell of diesel. The way my hands slipped trying to pull a bleeding man into cover. He didn't make it. We weren't supposed to be there. The mission was off, book, off, record. Officially, it never happened. But I still remember his name. And I remember what he said when I told him to hold on. Don't waste it. I didn't know what he meant at the time. Maybe he saw something in me, Ollie, or maybe he just needed to believe someone would get out. I did. But for what? To hide behind blog posts and cheap metaphors. To let people like Tom twist my story while I stayed silent to protect kids who were old enough to ask questions. I closed the file. Didn't save. Didn't delete. Just sat there, hands in my lap, staring at the glow of the screen. The comment was still there. You wrote her too well. Too close. You were there, weren't you? I moved the cursor toward reply. Hovered, waited. What would I even say? Yes, I was there. Yes, I still carry it. Yes, I remember what it cost. I didn't type a word. Sometimes silence is safer than truth. Sometimes it's not. A ping broke the stillness. New message, not a comment. Email. No subject line. No sender name. Just the body. I used to call you Mom. My hand froze over the trackpad. Not Reyes. Not a stranger. Someone else. Someone who knew what that line meant. How it was said, when it was said, and who said it to whom. And suddenly, I wasn't sitting in my apartment anymore. I was back in the field, heart pounding, wondering if I'd just been seen. Or summoned. The email still sat open on my screen. No name. No details. Just that one line. I used to call you Mom. I hadn't moved since I read it. Not really. Maybe that's what memory does. Locks your body in place while your mind runs laps through places you swore you'd never revisit. My phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. Tell your sister to stop posting lies. Your ex is talking to lawyers. I didn't need a signature to know who it came from. Tom had always preferred indirect warfare. Never said things to my face. Just seeded doubt in everyone else's inbox. I hadn't spoken to my sister in months. Not since she forwarded me a screenshot of a parenting forum where someone claimed I was mentally unstable and lying about my service. No name, again. But the IP was local, close enough to be familiar. I opened my messages. One from Rachel, short, clipped. F. Tom's saying you've got people watching the house. What's going on, Nora? I stared at the screen. Typed, erased, typed again. What could I even say? Yeah, someone from Guam read my blog and maybe knows who I am. Yeah, a ghost from my past is emailing me cryptic lines while my ex-husband builds a legal case that I'm paranoid. I didn't hit send. Instead, I checked the calendar. 1 week until the custody review. Tom had filed for full weekends. Said Tyler needed stability. Said my online behavior raised flags. I guess telling the truth is unstable now. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the sting. Sat back, stared at the crack in the ceiling like it might offer answers. This was the same pattern: smear, distract, undermine. He'd done it during the divorce, during therapy, during the worst nights, when I couldn't even tell up from down, and he told me I was imagining things. And maybe I was. Back then. But not now. Not when the comment was real. Not when the email came from someone who'd once pulled me out of fire and called me Mom like it meant something. Truth doesn't look stable at first. It just looks like light leaking through a wall you didn't know was cracked. And right now, the cracks were everywhere. The conference room smelled like paper and weak coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything feel sharper than it should. Tom sat across from me, suit too crisp, like he was interviewing for sympathy. His lawyer smiled too much. Mine didn't smile at all. Probably a good thing. Tyler was in the corner. Hood up, headphones in, pretending not to hear anything. God, I wished I could do the same. The mediator cleared her throat. We're here to revisit visitation and overnight custody. Mr. Barnes, would you like to begin? Tom leaned forward, all practiced charm. I just want what's best for Tyler. He's stressed. The back and forth every weekend isn't helping. And there've been some concerns. He didn't look at me. Didn't have to. His lawyer slid a printout across the table. My blog, a post from 6 months ago. One of the softer ones, honestly. Still, highlighted lines gleamed off the page. She writes as if these are real missions. Real people. But we all know it's fiction. Don't we? His lawyer said sweetly. I didn't answer. Tom finally turned to me. Come on, Nora. Even you said you never talked about your work. How can anyone know what's true? It was bait, I knew it, but it still landed. I looked at Tyler. He was watching me, now not angry, not scared, just unsure. And that gutted me more than any of Tom's jabs. I wanted to say, you were 4 when I came back limping. I carried your backpack with the same shoulder that took a bullet. But I didn't. Because it would have sounded crazy in a room like this. I forced a breath. I write to cope. That's all. Tom chuckled. Or rewrite history. His lawyer raised a brow. We're simply saying, there's a pattern. Emotional instability. Conspiracy-minded thinking. Possibly unresolved trauma. She turned to Tyler. You've seen your mom when she's upset, haven't you? I shot up from my chair. That's enough. Everyone went still. Even Tyler. I sat back down, jaw tight. Tom just leaned back, smug. And Tyler. He looked down at the floor. Didn't say a word. That silence. It was louder than anything else in the room. I didn't speak again until I got outside. The sun had already dipped low, casting long shadows on the courthouse steps. I stood there for a moment, watching people walk past like nothing had happened, like some woman hadn't just been put on trial for the crime of telling the truth too quietly. My hands were shaking, so I shoved them in my coat pockets. There was a time I could hold a rifle steady, in winds that knocked men off rooftops. Now I couldn't even hold eye contact with my son. I walked for blocks. Didn't know where I was going. Didn't care. Storefronts blurred past. A dog barked. Someone spilled coffee near a bus stop. But none of it reached me. All I could hear was the silence in that room, and the way Tyler looked at me. And like I was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. I sat on a bench near the water, pulled my coat tighter, closed my eyes, and for a second, I was somewhere else. Sand under my boots, sweat on my neck, a child's picture folded in my vest pocket. Tyler, 4 years old, covered in peanut butter, grinning like he trusted the world. I kept that photo through every deployment. Lost it on the last one, along with a part of myself. When I got home, he didn't recognize me. He clung to Tom's leg, called me the lady who sleeps a lot. He was too little to understand trauma. I wonder if he does now. My phone buzzed. I expected another text from Tom, or Rachel, or my lawyer, but it was from Tyler. Just one line. Were any of those stories about you? I stared at it, felt my throat tighten, typed and erased a dozen replies. In the end, I didn't text back. Instead, I walked home, sat at my desk, opened the blog. The comment from days ago still sat there, waiting like a question no one else dared ask. You wrote her too well. Too close. You were there, weren't you? I clicked reply. Typed slow, hand steady this time. Yes, I was there. And I remember everything. Then I hit send. I woke up to 27 missed calls. 3 from Rachel. 5 from my lawyer. 1 from a number I hadn't seen in years. Langley prefix. The rest. Unknown. I sat up slowly, back aching from another night on the couch. Phone still buzzing on the table like it was trying to escape. I tapped open my browser. Didn't know what I was looking for. But it didn't take long. There it was. Front page. A defense blog, not huge, but credible enough to make noise. Headline: Ooh is Agent Honor. Military fiction may not be so fictional. My name wasn't in the title, but it was in the second paragraph. Right after the words, multiple anonymous sources confirms MH, known blogger behind Goa Stories, is believed to be a former operations analyst codenamed Agent Honor by. They'd pulled pieces from old forum posts, compared details from my stories with declassified fragments. One even cited a mission I thought was still sealed. They got the tone right, too. No drama, no smear. Just facts laid out in clean, careful language. Enough truth to burn. Just enough doubt to protect themselves. Below the article, a side-by-side image. One, a blurry photo from some base. Me in uniform, back turned, name patch pixelated. The other, my current author headshot from the blog. Glasses, scarf, smiling like I hadn't seen ghosts in years. The caption read, "Off. Is this the same woman?" My stomach dropped. This wasn't a leak. This was a slow, deliberate detonation. And the moment I saw it, I knew who had lit the fuse. Rays. Not out of revenge, not even for justice, but to force my hand, to stop me from hiding behind metaphors and start saying it plain. You were there, you lived. So say it. The blog was crashing. Too many visitors, comments overflowing. Some supportive, some confused, some cruel. I didn't reply to any of them. Not yet. I just stood at the window, watching the street below. No black SUVs, no shadows, just normal. But that's the thing about exposure. It doesn't always come with flashing lights. Sometimes it looks like a quiet Tuesday morning with your name finally out there and nowhere left to run. The phone rang again. This time, I answered. A woman's voice. Calm, direct. "I know who you are," she said. "And I want to tell your real story." Her name was Elise. Calm voice, no accent. Used my first name like we'd met before. "We don't need to do this over the phone," I said. I wasn't trying to be rude, Just careful. I understand, she replied. But I wanted to ask for permission before writing a single word. That made me pause. Most reporters don't ask. They just connect dots and push publish. You're not military press, I said. It wasn't a question. No. But I served. Communications officer. Afghanistan, 2010. That explained the tone. The restraint. I know what it's like, she said gently. To come back home and not know where to put the weight you carried. I swallowed hard. You think people want the story? I asked. Or just the spectacle? Honestly, she said. Both. But the right ones will know the difference. She didn't push, didn't demand access or sound bites. Just sat on the line with me like she had time. I've read every Goa post, she said. Especially the ones you took down. That made my spine go stiff. She added quickly, they're archived. Not public, I promise. I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking this time. Just still. Heavy. Why now? I asked. Why me? Elise didn't hesitate. Because too many women served in silence, and when they came back, they were either erased or broken down. But you wrote. You remembered. And you made it poetic enough for people to hear without flinching. She let that settle. Then added, and maybe it's time someone called that bravery too. I didn't speak for a long minute. Just breathed through the lump in my throat. Listened to the radiator click once. Watched a leaf press against the window like it was trying to stay. I'm not ready to give names, I finally said. Or details. Some things still aren't mine to tell. I respect that. Elise replied. I'm not asking for a full debrief. What are you asking for then? A beginning. Her voice softened. Just one piece. Your voice, unfiltered. Not as MH, not as Agent Honor. Just Nora. I let that name sit there a moment. Felt how strange it sounded after all this time. You don't have to say everything, she said again. Just say something true. And maybe that's all it would take. Not a full confession. Not a memoir. Just a fracture in the silence big enough to let someone else breathe. I started with the bank records. Old logins. Joint accounts I should have shut down after the divorce. Ones Tom insisted we keep open for emergencies. Funny how the emergencies only ever flowed one way. I pulled up transaction histories. Noticed a pattern I'd ignored before. Small withdrawals tied to burner apps, timed just before every court date. I downloaded the PDFs. Saved them into a folder labeled Quiet Proof. Didn't know what I'd do with it yet. But the act of gathering made me feel less hollow. I moved on to emails. Back when we still lived together, Tom had access to my cloud backup. Nothing classified, of course. Those were never stored digitally. But he'd seen personal photos, private notes, even an early draft of GOHA, back when it was just Word documents and self-doubt. He never asked questions. Just smiled tight and said, "Write it all out if it helps." I think he knew even then. If he ever wanted to twist the story, he'd already have the raw materials. My inbox pinged. Another comment notification. Another tag on a forum I never joined. She's lying. No one with real clearance writes like that. Seth. Classic PTSD dramatics. Seth. Crazy woman with a keyboard. It didn't surprise me. The world's full of people who'd rather attack survivors than admit something ugly might be true. Still, it chipped at something soft inside me. I closed the browser. Stared at the pile of printed bank records on the floor. Outside, rain tapped the window. Not a storm. Just steady enough to feel like background noise. Tyler hadn't texted since that one line. Were any of those stories about you? I wanted to believe it meant curiosity. Hope even. But silence has its own gravity. And lately, It was pulling harder. I picked up my phone, scrolled to his name. Thumb hovered over the call button. Then I locked the screen instead. Because if he wasn't ready to ask the next question, I wasn't ready to answer it. Not yet. The call came just after midnight. Blocked number. No voicemail. I almost let it go. Almost. But something about the timing made my chest tighten. So I answered. Agent Barnes, the voice said. Calm, measured, soft enough to feel familiar. I hadn't heard that version of my name in years. Who is this? I asked. A pause. Then, Rios. We worked Kabul and Riyadh together. I closed my eyes. Let the name settle. Agent Rios. Always direct. Never wasted a breath. Didn't think I'd hear from you again, I said. Didn't plan to call. But your name's circulating now. People are talking. And someone tried to dig into a comms log that hasn't been active since 2018. My pulse spiked. Mine. Yours. He confirmed. Used your old token sequence. Flagged as suspicious, but nothing pulled. Just a pattern. I sat down. Floor cold under my bare feet. Tom, I said. Another pause. I can't confirm that. But I remember him. Smiled too much. Watched people too long. That sounded like Rios. Straight to the bone. Why tell me now? I asked. Because I don't like loose threads, and you're not the only one with things to lose if this story gets twisted. His words sat heavy between us. You think he's using it to smear me? I asked. I think, Rios said, he's using your silence like a weapon, same way intel gets rewritten when no one checks the original file. I let that land. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, everything felt louder. What do I do? He didn't answer for a second. Then, start your own file. Track what he's touched. And if you've got proof, keep it off grid. Because if he's willing to play this dirty, he won't stop just because you don't fight back. The line went quiet after that. No goodbye. No threat. Just silence. The kind only old allies leave behind when they've said enough to matter. I started the file that night. Not on my laptop. Too traceable. Too fragile. I pulled out the old burner drive from the back of my drawer. The one I swore I'd never use again. Plugged it in, created a folder, for light only. Inside, I started dropping pieces. Bank statements, email headers, even screenshots of Tom commenting anonymously on forums he swore he never read. All of it lined up in a way that made my skin itch. It wasn't just petty. It was precise. He wasn't smearing me out of spite. He was running a full-blown operation, the kind that used to be aimed at warlords and leakers. And now me. I sat back, breathing shallow. Then, almost without thinking, I picked up my phone and opened a new message. Tyler. You don't have to respond. But if you ever want to know my side, I'll show you everything. No edits, no spin. Just the truth. I hit send before I could second guess it. No big explanation. No begging. Just an open door. And then, I went to the closet. I hadn't touched that box in years. The one labeled Taxes but full of flash drives, field notes, and old patches I didn't have the heart to throw away. Buried under the canvas folder was a stack of paper. I froze. Pulled it out, rough, edged, stapled, marked in pencil, GOH Draft v1.3 home copy. But I never printed version 1.3. That draft never left my hard drive. I flipped through the pages. Underlines. Margin notes. One corner folded with a word scrawled. Careful. My breath caught. Tom had printed this. Not recently. Not by accident. And that meant he'd had access long before the blog went live. Long before I thought any of it mattered. Which also meant he'd been preparing his story before I ever told mine. I started printing just after sunrise. The air was still, quiet like the house had finally exhaled. Page after page slid out of the tray. Bank statements, timestamps, metadata summaries. Not loud, not dramatic. Just proof. I sorted them slow, my fingers brushing over each corner like I was sealing a wound. At the bottom of every set, I wrote a date, a note, sometimes a name. Not to accuse. Just to remember who I was when each line was written. I didn't plan to go public. Not yet. This wasn't for headlines. This was for when people stopped pretending and finally started asking the right questions. I opened a fresh manila folder. Wrote on the front, else, if anything happens, give this to Elise. Her name felt steady under my pen, the one person I believed would hold the story without twisting it. I tucked in a photo next. One of me in uniform. Not posed. Taken from behind on a rainy day, helmet off, hair pulled tight, looking out at a horizon no one else could see. Tyler had taken that photo. He was 6. Didn't understand what deployment meant. Just knew mommy packed all her socks and left kisses on his pillow. I flipped the picture over. Wrote 3 words, I was there. Then I closed the folder. Tied it with string, not because it needed to be fancy, but because I wanted it to feel deliberate. Not an accident. Not a meltdown. A message. Outside, the clouds hung low, but there was no rain. Just a quiet sort of pressure. Like the weather knew something was about to shift. The manila folder fit clean into the padded envelope. I wrote Elise's address carefully, like each letter mattered. No return name, just a P.O. box I still maintained in Virginia. Muscle memory from old habits. Then I printed a second label. Different recipient. A private legal contact I hadn't used in years. Someone who once walked me out of a mess with no badge and no questions. Backup. Always backup. I slid both envelopes into my tote, wrapped them in an old scarf, and headed out the door. The air smelled like wet concrete and burnt leaves. One of those between mornings, where summer hasn't quite let go, but fall keeps trying to move in. The post office was nearly empty. Just a young couple mailing wedding invites and a man in overalls arguing with a scale. I stepped up, handed the first package over. Certified, tracked, no signature required. The clerk barely glanced at me. Just did his job. And that felt good. Like I was nobody again. Before I left, I paused. Reached into my bag. Pulled out the second envelope. Hesitated. Then slid it forward too. Insurance. In case things got loud before I was ready. Afterward, I walked 2 blocks down to a cafe I used to like. The one with the dusty scones and bitter drip. It hadn't changed. The bell jingled when I opened the door. And there he was. Tom, sitting by the window. Laptop open. Still in that same smug posture like the world owed him eye contact. Our eyes met. He didn't flinch. I didn't either. I walked past him. Ordered a coffee. Waited in silence while the barista fumbled with the filter. He approached as I was adding cream. Nora, he said. Like we were still on speaking terms. I didn't answer. Just stirred slowly. He leaned in, dropped his voice. You really want to start a war over old files? I looked up, met his gaze. I'm not starting anything, I said. I'm just keeping a record. He scoffed. You think anyone's gonna believe? I cut him off. I didn't come to fight Tom. Just came to make sure you know. I kept the receipts. Then I picked up my coffee, turned, and left him standing there with nothing but his own reflection in a window that hadn't been cleaned in years. The house felt too quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The kind where even the air seems to wait for something to break. I dropped my keys in the bowl, toed off my shoes, and walked straight to the desk. Didn't bother with tea. Didn't turn on the lights. The blog dashboard blinked to life, slow as ever. 12 posts. Most of them written between midnight and collapse. I opened each one. Set them to private. Not because I regretted them. But because this time, I didn't want the noise. Didn't want the voices guessing at what I meant. I only left one post. Blank page. New title, What I Never Said Aloud. And I wrote, not as agent, not as writer, just as me. No heroics, no missions. Just. There are things I never told anyone. Not because I was ashamed, but because silence was the only thing I trusted. I didn't leave because I was weak. I left because if I stayed, I wasn't sure I'd survive. I've been called dramatic, unstable, worthless. Sometimes, I believed it. But the truth doesn't need to be loud to be real. And healing doesn't need applause. I kept writing. Word after word, like they'd waited in my lungs for years. When I was done, I didn't reread. Didn't edit. Just clicked, publish. Then I walked away. Folded laundry. Fed the cat. Sat on the floor with my back to the fridge, hands resting in my lap like they finally had nothing to hold. Hours passed, maybe minutes. Eventually I checked the post again. No likes, no shares, one comment, anonymous. I clicked it open. It read, Mum. That's all, no punctuation, no accusation, just one word. But it split something wide open. The meeting place was quiet. No flags, no flashing lights, just a government annex office with flickering bulbs and stale air. Levy met me at the front. Khakis, windbreaker, badge half-tucked. He looked like someone you'd ignore at a bus stop, and that's how I knew he was the real thing. Agent Barnes, he said. I hadn't heard that name in weeks. It still sat strange in the air. Nora's fine, I told him. He nodded, led me down a hallway that hummed with old wiring and tired secrets. Inside a windowless room, I handed him the folder. No speech. No long explanation. Just, these are copies. The originals are protected. He flipped through the first few pages. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. Some of this, it goes deeper than we expected. He finally said. I didn't ask what he meant. Didn't want to know yet. He paused. Looked at me. Really looked. You're not doing this to hurt him, are you? I shook my head. I'm doing this so the next woman doesn't get rewritten out of her own life. That landed. He sat back. Took a breath like it carried weight. Then said. You were never invisible. We just didn't know how to look. The words hit somewhere I didn't think was still raw, somewhere under the armor. Deeper than any wound Tom ever left. I swallowed hard. That's not your fault, I said, but I wasn't sure who I meant. Him. The agency, my family. Me. Maybe all of us. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a signed receipt, slid it across the table. Official chain of custody, he said. You've done your part. I looked at the paper. Didn't pick it up. Because for the first time, I didn't need proof I'd done the right thing. I just needed to know I wasn't alone in the room. And somehow, in that moment, I wasn't. The call came just after lunch. Block number. Again. I answered out of habit. Nora Barnes. Speaking. This is Agent Kim with internal oversight. Just letting you know. He's been brought in, pending review. That was it. No drama. No handcuffs on the news. Just those 5 words. She's been brought in. I sat there on the couch, staring at the wall. Not smiling, not crying, just still. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't closure. It was something quieter. Like finding a bruise you forgot you had. Lying pressing on it just to feel that it's still there. A few hours later, my phone lit up with messages from names I hadn't seen since the BBQ cousins. In-laws. Eve Muff. Hey, I heard. Mao. Didn't realize it was that serious. Guess we all kinda misjudged things. No one said sorry. Not directly. They danced around it. Like if they didn't name the wound, they wouldn't have to feel it. I didn't answer any of them. But then, a new message appeared. Grosser Tyler. Just his name was enough to make my chest tighten. I opened it. I read it all. Still figuring things out, but thank you. 3 short lines. No emojis. No punctuation past the period. But it felt more honest than anything I'd heard in years. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Finally settled on, you don't have to believe me. Just ask questions. I'll always answer them. Sigh, hit send. Close the phone. Let myself breathe again. Out the window, the sky was starting to shift. Soft orange bleeding into gray. No victory music. No confetti. Just the quiet beginning of something that might matter later. Elise met me at the diner just off I-85. The kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like burnt hope. She was already there when I arrived, manila folder in hand, coffee untouched. I slid into the booth across from her. Didn't speak first. She opened the folder, tapped a page with her index finger. This is strong, she said. Too strong to bury in an anonymous op-ed. I nodded. She looked up. Careful, but steady. Do you want to stay anonymous? I could have said yes. I had every reason to. Safer. Cleaner. No follow-up questions from neighbors or old coworkers. But I thought of Tyler. Of what it meant to tell the truth and put your name next to it. I reached into my bag. Pulled out a photo. Me in Kabul. Hair windswept, eyes not smiling but alive. I want this to run with it, I said. She took the photo carefully, as if it might crack. I didn't survive all that, just to hide behind a screen name. I added. Elise gave a small nod. Not the polite kind, the kind that says, I get it, we talked logistics. Timing. Edits that wouldn't dilute meaning. She asked, why now? I looked past her, toward the window smeared with late afternoon haze. Because someone finally asked, I said. And because someone's listening. Elise didn't take notes. Didn't need to. She closed the folder, folded her hands over it. You understand, once this runs, there's no taking it back. I don't want to take it back, I said. I've spent too much of my life doing that already. We parted without a handshake. Just a mutual pause at the door, like two people who both knew the next step was heavy. But necessary. Back in the car, I turned off the radio. Let the silence settle, not the old kind, the haunted, heavy kind. This one felt earned. The article went live on a Wednesday. No fireworks. No trending hashtags. Just a headline in plain serif font. The sauce, I was never invisible. Notes from the life of Agent Nora Barnes. The byline said, as told to Elise Carter. But the story, the words, those were mine. I didn't check stats. Didn't share it on socials. Didn't wait for applause. But the emails started coming. At first, just a few. Then dozens. All from women. Some from names I didn't know. Others from names I'd tried to forget. Fuss. I was Air Force Intel 9198. Nobody asked what it cost. Sus. My ex told our kids I left to chase drama. I left because I had PTSD and no one cared. Zcos. You spoke what I never could. Thank you. I read them all. One had no subject line. Just a single sentence. Ox. You reminded me I wasn't crazy. I printed that one. Taped it inside my pantry door. Not for motivation. Just so I wouldn't forget why silence was never justice. I didn't hear from Tom. Didn't expect to. He was still being processed. According to the last email from Levy. That was fine. I wasn't looking for his apology. I already knew it wouldn't come. What mattered now were the voices that had stayed quiet for too long and were finally pushing through the noise. Then, 3 days later, Tyler knocked on my door. Not a text. Not a call. Just the knock. I opened it to find him standing there, backpack slung low, hands jammed into hoodie pockets. He didn't look mad. Didn't look sure, either. Just tired. Maybe like me. Hey, he said. Hey, I answered. A beat of silence. He glanced past me, like trying to read the shape of my house, without stepping inside. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped back. Opened the door wider. You don't need to explain, he added quickly. I think I want to understand. Not all of it, just you. Those last two words, they hit harder than I expected. Just you, not the version Dad described, not the agent from the blog, just me. I nodded. Gestured to the kitchen. I made coffee, I said. Pretty sure it's still warm. He followed me in. Dropped his bag by the couch. Sat where he used to sit when he was 10 and thought I was indestructible. Maybe he still did. Or maybe he just wanted to know why I wasn't. Either way, he was here, and that mattered more than any medal they forgot to give me. We sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold. I didn't tell him everything. Didn't need to. Didn't want to. But I told him enough. About Sahal. About the static in my ears when the radio cut out. About crawling through sand with one working leg and the prayer I didn't believe in playing on loop, in my head anyway. I left out the blood, the rot, the moment I thought about giving up. But I told him about the buzz of flies and the sound the med team made when they realized I was still breathing. He didn't interrupt. Didn't look away. When I stopped talking, he reached for his mug, took a sip. Then, quietly, I think I thought you just left. I did, I said, but not for the reasons they told you. He nodded. Thanks for saying it out loud. That was all. No movie scene hug. No tears. Just two people trying to sit in the same truth for the first time in years. Later that week, I met with the group Elise had mentioned. A private circle for women in intelligence, most of them retired. Some still on active desk duty. All carrying scars they'd never filed reports for. I didn't go to teach. Didn't go to lead. I just showed up. At the end of the first meeting, a woman maybe 10 years younger than me said quietly, I thought I was just being dramatic. I looked at her. Held her gaze. You weren't, I said. She nodded like she'd been waiting years to hear. That, from someone who didn't flinch. We didn't start a movement. Didn't sign petitions or pose for headlines. We just made space for the kind of grief no one ever puts medals on. That night, after Tyler had gone home, after the dishes were stacked and the lights dimmed, I stood in the hallway. There was a blank spot on the wall where the Kabul photo used to hang. I'd taken it down when Tyler said it gave him nightmares. But now I reached into the drawer. Pulled out the frame. Wiped it clean with the sleeve of my shirt. Hung it back up. Not for pride, not to remind him of war, but to remind myself, I was there. And I made it the image sat crooked for a second, then settled. Outside, I heard someone laugh. Probably the neighbors. Inside, I exhaled. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like home.